What if I told you that one of the most iconic chapters in the Hobbit book was completely rewritten for the movie? Riddles in the Dark isn't just a fan-favorite chapter, it's the moment that we meet Gollum, discover the One Ring, and witness Bilbo begin his massive transformation. But Peter Jackson's adaptation doesn't just change the riddles, it reimagines how Thorin's company is captured, how Bilbo gets lost deep inside the mountain, and even how Gollum is portrayed. So what exactly was removed, rewritten, or added? And does the film do justice to Tolkien's most pivotal chapter in the Hobbit book? Well, in today's video, I'm going to uncover the answers to each of those questions as we take these critical scenes of the movie and compare them to their corresponding chapters in the book. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 4 of Movies vs. Manuscripts, the Hobbit Edition. This week, we are finishing up the first film in the Hobbit trilogy, and of course, I'll be covering all the changes across the 4 major categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. But first, let's review what happens during these scenes in the movie, that way it's fresh on our mind for the analysis. Picking up from where we left off last week, we see a traveling montage as the dwarves trek across Middle-earth, and eventually we see them on the side of a mountain during a thunderstorm. We learn that this is a thunder battle, and we see stone giants hurling rocks at one another as the dwarves and Bilbo nearly die multiple times. Luckily, after Bilbo gets saved by Thorin, they happen to find a cave in the mountain where they can rest. So, with Beaufort taking the first watch, they all go to sleep. Bilbo tries to sneak off and head back to Rivendell, but Beaufort stops him for a minute to talk. Right when Bilbo is about to set out again though, the floor of the cave cracks open and everyone falls into a tunnel slide thingy, which lands them in a cage inside the mountain. Goblins then run towards them, rounding them up and taking them to the Great Goblin. However, during the commotion, Bilbo manages to slip away. Unfortunately for him though, one goblin sees him and they fight, causing them both to fall deeper into the cavern below. The movie then cuts back to the dwarves with the Great Goblin, and we see the large monster sing a song, which is only in the extended edition by the way, and I'm really happy they removed it from the theatrical release. The song is not pretty. Anyway, Thorin is eventually revealed, and the Great Goblin sends word to the Pale Orc about his capture. We then cut back to Bilbo, who wakes up amid mushrooms deep in the mountain, and he sees Gollum come up and take the goblin who fell with Bilbo. But Bilbo stays unseen. He also watches the ring fall out of Gollum's pocket as he beats the goblin unconscious. And then Bilbo picks it up and puts it inside of his own pocket. He then sneaks after Gollum and eventually meets him, and they play the iconic riddle game. I won't go into each riddle right now, but after Gollum fails to answer Bilbo's final question, the creature gets really upset and realizes that he lost the ring. He then comes to the conclusion that Bilbo stole it, and so Bilbo makes a run for it. The movie then cuts back to the dwarves, and we see Gandalf save the day before the torture can begin, and they all run away as well, fighting goblins as they go. Then, going back to Bilbo, we see him get stuck in a small passage and just barely squeeze through, which causes him to fall. The ring goes flying in the air and then lands perfectly on his finger, causing him to disappear. The dwarves and Gandalf escape after killing off the Great Goblin, and Bilbo escapes as well after jumping over Gollum. Bilbo then meets up with Thorin's company in the woods to the shock of everyone who definitely thought he was dead. There's a heartfelt moment in which Bilbo explains why he came back, but it is short-lived as Azog approaches with his wargs, and they soon surround the company who have all climbed into the trees. Gandalf does what he can by lighting pine cones on fire and throwing them down at the beasts, and he also sends a message through a butterfly that he finds in the tree. Eventually, the trees begin to fall over, and Thorin makes a stand against Azog, pretty quickly being knocked over. Bilbo then runs over and defends Thorin, showcasing his hobbit bravery, and the rest of the dwarves eventually start fighting as well. Thankfully, before all hope is lost, the eagles arrive and carry off Thorin's company. After a while, they come to rest on top of a strangely shaped stone, and Thorin almost dies, but Gandalf saves him. He thanks Bilbo for saving his life, and then they look in the distance and see the lonely mountain, with the movie ending on the beautiful shot of the entire company staring out at their old home. And that finishes up all the scenes we're covering today, which happens to be the rest of the scenes in this first movie. So let's jump into things by starting with our first 3 categories of characters, timeline, and location. As usual, these categories are quite simple, and starting with characters, we only have 2 deviations. First, we obviously have the issue of Azog once again. In case this is your first time watching, he's actually dead in the books, and it's Bolg who is in charge of the orcs. But as we'll see in the plot changes, they aren't hunting Thorin's company anyway, so even if Azog were alive, it still wouldn't make sense. Anyway, the second character difference is that the eagles talk. This also happens in the Lord of the Rings books, but Peter Jackson chose a long time ago to just make the eagle speak in squawk squawk instead of the common tongue. As for timeline, this is a very interesting one. Similarly to when the Fellowship of the Ring goes through the Mines of Moria, time passes differently underground. Gandalf tells Bilbo later that they went into the mountain on Monday or Tuesday and they got out on Thursday. So Bilbo had been underground for multiple days, groping his way through the dark tunnels. And lastly, for the location category, I think we can give it a pass this week. If you noticed any issues with locations though, drop a comment below. Before we jump into the plot changes, I just wanted to give a shout out to Jason, Cody, Joshua, and the rest of my incredible Patreon supporters who make videos like this possible every month. You can check out the link in the description if you want to join the community and gain early access to all videos, plus some other fun perks. Now with that being said, let's jump into the plot changes. The first change we have is a simple one. Gandalf is still with Thorin's company, and they still have their ponies and all their supplies. If you remember from the last episode, there is no sneaking out of Rivendell like the movie shows, and so Gandalf doesn't stall for time. Elrond sets them up with supplies and even gives Gandalf a larger pony to ride, and then he sends them on their way. We also learn that Gandalf and Elrond had studied all their possible paths and decided upon the one that was least dangerous. And speaking of danger, that brings us to the second change, which is that they don't nearly die in a thunder battle. In the movie, we literally watch as half the company gets smashed between two rocks, but then somehow survive it. I have no idea how this happened, but the book is a lot more simple. There are giants, yes, and there is a thunder battle, but Thorin's company does not get caught in the middle of it. And this also means that another change is the fact that Thorin doesn't save Bilbo from nearly falling off a cliffside, and he's not nearly as mean in the book. Movie Thorin hates Bilbo for no good reason, and I just don't understand it. Anyway, next, they don't randomly find shelter like in the movie, but rather we read that they sent Fili and Kili to hunt for shelter, and the two dwarves came back saying that they found a cave. Gandalf was skeptical, asking if they had investigated the whole thing, and they said that they did. So the entire company went inside, and Gandalf did his own investigation, giving it the all clear. Although, just like in the movie, they did not light a fire. Instead, they all changed out of their soaked clothing, and they took out their pipes and blew smoke rings. Slowly, they went to sleep one by one, and that is our next change, and a pretty big one, which is that Bilbo doesn't try to leave and head back to Rivendell. That is completely made up for the movie, as in the book he is pretty well stuck in, and although he misses home, I don't think he even viewed it as a possibility to trek all the way back to Rivendell by himself. Plus, I think in the book he viewed wherever Gandalf was as the safest place, so since Gandalf is still with them, why would he leave? Next, the movie also decided to make a small adjustment to how they get captured by goblins. Instead of a trapdoor underneath them and a slide in the book, there's simply a door which the goblins come out of to grab them. But the interesting part is Bilbo's dream. Right before the goblins appear, Bilbo had a nightmare about cracks appearing in the cave, and he wakes up to see that the dream is real. He then screams, which wakes up Gandalf, who disappears in a bright flash, killing a couple goblins in the process. The dwarves, though, were much too slow in their waking, and they get captured along with Bilbo. Now, another major difference is that Bilbo doesn't slip away right at the beginning of their capture, but is actually with them when they meet the Great Goblin, and when Gandalf reappears. We'll see how he truly gets lost in a little bit. But first, we have a couple of other changes regarding this Great Goblin. First, Thorin actually tries to be polite to the goblin and talk his way out of this mess. He introduces himself and even says, "At your service." We learn that goblins are evil creatures, but they don't have a specific hate for dwarves. They really don't like elves, and the only dwarves they hate are the ones who were involved in the wars many years ago. And unfortunately for Bilbo and his new friends, Thorin and his father are kind of the reason those wars began. So once Thorin introduces himself, the Great Goblin isn't pleased. But that's not what sends him over the edge. It's actually when another goblin reveals Orcris to the Great Goblin that they begin to freak out. Just like in the movie, they hate this blade, and so after seeing it, the Great Goblin orders his people to torture the dwarves, and he runs straight for Thorin himself. Thankfully, just like in the movie, Gandalf reappears with a bright flash, which blinds and distracts the enemy, and Thorin's company makes a run for it. But the change here is that Gandalf actually kills the Great Goblin right then and there as he was charging at Thorin. It isn't saved for later like the movie shows. Also, it isn't really specified, but I don't think the Great Goblin was as big as the movie shows. He was just bigger than the average goblin. Now remember, Bilbo is still with them at this point, which brings us to the next change, and that is that they take turns carrying Bilbo, whose short legs aren't fast enough to keep up with the dwarves. But when Dory is carrying the Hobbit, he gets attacked from behind, causing him to drop Bilbo, who falls to the ground and hits his head on a rock, getting completely knocked out. He doesn't fight a goblin like the movie showed earlier in this scene, and he doesn't fall dozens of feet into a cavern, which somehow he survives in the movie. And that leads us to the all-important chapter, Riddles in the Dark. There are quite a few differences between this scene in the movie and the original version in the book. Starting with Bilbo waking up after being knocked out for who knows how long, we read that he groped around in the darkness and found something odd, a cold piece of round metal. Somewhat unknowingly, he picked it up and put it in his pocket, and then he continued to feel around. Remember, it is pitch black. This isn't like the movie where somehow you can see inside the cave. There is no light. Bilbo is extremely distressed, but is comforted a little when he feels Sting under his clothes, and he realizes that the goblins hadn't searched him well enough to find it. So he takes it out and decides that he can't go backwards and he can't go sideways. So onward is the only option, which is a small change in itself, because the movie shows Bilbo witnessing Gollum carry off a goblin. But in the book, he doesn't see that, and so his finding of the lake in the mountain where Gollum lives is totally by chance. But eventually he does find it, and we read that luckily for Bilbo, Gollum wasn't particularly hungry at the time, and since his curiosity outweighed his hunger, Gollum crept up on the Hobbit and asked what it is, and eventually they begin their riddle game. Now the riddle game is quite similar to the movie, and it's one of the best scenes from the trilogy in my opinion. However, I do want to mention a few riddles that didn't quite make the cut, because there are actually a few more than what gets shown in the film. So here they are. Bilbo says, "An eye in a blue face saw an eye in a green face. That eye is like to this eye, said the first eye, but in low place, not in high place." This was a tough one for Gollum, who had to really stretch his memory back to when he lived above the mountain. But eventually he got the answer, which he said was sun on the daisies. The sun being the eye in the blue face and the daisy being the eye in the green face. Then Gollum asked this one. "It cannot be seen, cannot be felt, cannot be heard, cannot be smelt. It lies behind stars and under hills, and empty holes it fills. It comes first and follows after, ends life, kills laughter." Bilbo easily got this one, which was darkness, as he was currently surrounded by it. Then Bilbo had another, which was, "No legs lay on one leg, 2 legs sat near on 3 legs, 4 legs got some." Now when I read that for the first time, I was so confused, but I guess this is a common riddle back in the day. Gollum soon gets the answer, which is a fish, no legs, on a table, 1 leg, man, 2 legs, sitting on a stool, 3 legs, and a cat, 4 legs, gets the leftovers. Let me know in the comments if you've heard that one before or solved it before it was revealed in the book, because if you did, I'm very impressed. Anyway, the final riddle that got cut comes from Gollum, and it is, "Alive without breath, as cold as death, never thirsty, ever drinking, all in mail, never clinking." And Bilbo nearly didn't get this one, except for the fact that a fish jumped out of the water right at that moment, and he realized that the answer was just that, a fish. Of course, besides those 4, we have the normal ones that the movie included, and normally I would understand cutting the extra riddles to save time, but since they added so much fluff to the movie, it just doesn't make much sense that they cut stuff that was actually in the book. But anyway, moving on, we still have a few more changes regarding Gollum and Bilbo's time in the heart of the mountain. The next change is a small detail I wanted to mention, which is that in the book, Gollum kept the ring at his island in the lake. He used to keep it on him all the time, but we read that it became difficult for him to wear constantly or have near him. So he kept it on his island and only retrieved it when he needed to accomplish some sneaky business. And this was one of those times. After failing Bilbo's last question, he said that he needed to gather some things before they went, meaning to go get the ring and then come back and kill Bilbo. But as he reached the island, he realized that the ring was gone. That's when Bilbo heard a scream and realized that Gollum was not happy about something. Which brings us to our next change, as the movie rewrote the way in which Bilbo wears the ring for the first time. I think they wanted to pay homage to the original trilogy, and so they made Bilbo fall like Frodo did in the Fellowship of the Ring. But in the Hobbit book, we read that Gollum kept asking Bilbo what he has in his pockets, and Bilbo wasn't sure. So as he turned and ran from Gollum, who he could tell no longer feared the sword and was in some sort of manic rage, Bilbo reached in his pocket and felt the cold metal he had put there earlier. And as the ring usually does in its sneaky way, it slipped onto his finger, causing him to disappear. Of course, he didn't know this just yet and was confused when he tripped and Gollum went past him without seeing him. Bilbo then overhears a conversation between Gollum and Smeagol as they decide what to do, and he learns the truth of the ring as Gollum says that the goblins will capture Bilbo and then take the ring and learn its powers. Gollum then decides to head for the exit to hopefully stop Bilbo, but by doing this, he leads invisible Bilbo right to it. Gollum then peers out through the crack, which is where the exit is, and he sees goblins guarding the door, which they had made many years ago. Gollum can't get up the courage to leave because he knows he isn't strong enough to take on the goblins. But Bilbo has to make up his mind on what to do, and just like in the movie, he leaps over Gollum. Unlike the movie, however, our next change is that he has to deal with the goblins. The movie makes it seem like this exit is a natural one in the mountain and there aren't any goblins nearby. But like I said, this door was made by the goblins and they guarded it well. And somehow, probably by a trick of the ring, it had slipped off of Bilbo's finger. And so suddenly, the goblins could see him. Quickly, he reached back in his pocket and found the ring and put it back on, causing himself to vanish right in front of their eyes, which freaked all the goblins out. In the commotion, he ran for the door and could just barely squeeze through, snapping the buttons on his vest in the process. As we know, the movie at least took inspiration from that part when Gollum is chasing him. Now, before we head into the final part of Azog attacking them and the eagle rescue, I need to address what should be an obvious change, and that is that the entire escape sequence from the dwarves and Gandalf in the movie is completely made up and ridiculous. Although there is running and fighting, the idea that they did those crazy stunts and acrobatics and fell hundreds of feet while sliding on a bridge is absolutely insane. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, the Great Goblin was dead by that point. Anyway, now moving outside of the mountain, our first change out here has to do with Bilbo's reveal. It's slightly different in the book as he essentially gets in the middle of everybody and takes the ring off so he just pops up out of nowhere. This greatly astonishes all the dwarves and Gandalf, and afterward he explains his entire journey through the mountain and his encounter with Gollum, which he doesn't do in the movie. This explanation impresses all the dwarves a great deal, and they now think a lot more highly of their burglar, who somehow snuck through the mountain alone without getting caught. Of course, just like in the movie, he doesn't reveal the ring, but Gandalf is suspicious of him. And now we need to talk about the most obvious change among them all, which is the involvement of Azog and the orcs hunting Thorin's company. Simply put, those characters aren't involved, but the event itself does still happen. So what does the book really say about it? Well, while talking in the woods, they hear the howl of wolves, who are native to the area and often got up to evil deeds by raiding local villages and homes. They also had a partnership with the goblins of the mountain and often would meet them as they were supposed to do that night. And unfortunately for Thorin's company, they were standing right at that meeting place. So just like in the movie, they scramble up some trees to escape the oncoming wargs, and Gandalf throws fiery pine cones down on them, which seems to work for a little bit. However, nightfall comes and the goblins come out of the mountain. They are very pleased to see that the company is stuck in the trees as they wanted revenge for the murder of their great goblin. So we read that they put out the fires everywhere except for under the trees where Thorin's company was, and then they fanned the flames. The goblins then sang songs and taunted the dwarves, knowing that they were stuck, and in that moment, it seemed like all hope was lost. But thankfully for Thorin's company, at the top of the mountain, the Lord of the Eagles was watching and saw the fires below. No, the Eagles weren't summoned by Gandalf. Rather, the Lord of the Eagles kept watch over those mountains as he and his kin were of a noble and ancient race who hated evil. They often attacked goblins who ventured out of their caves and scared them back inside the mountain. So when he heard howling in the distance and the voices of goblins, he and his kin swooped down and rescued Gandalf and the dwarves from the sticky situation they were in. Bilbo was almost left behind once again, but just managed to jump and grab onto Dory's ankle as the birds carried them off. He then somehow hung on until they reached their first resting point, which is the final change for this week, as the movie just shows them being taken to Carrock, the high place that they're left at in the movie. But in the book, they are first taken to the Great Shelf, where Gandalf meets with the Lord of the Eagles and discusses plans to be taken farther along. Plus, they rest and eat because the company hasn't eaten for at least 3 days. The Eagles brought them rabbits and sheep, and then the dwarves prepared a mighty meal and then slept. It isn't until the next morning that they are then taken to Carrock and dropped off. And that is where we'll stop things for this week and for this movie. Oh, and by the way, I guess I'll throw this in here now that I'm thinking about it, but Thorin doesn't almost die. Anyway, that wraps up everything for this episode. If you enjoyed, please be sure to like and subscribe and share with a friend. Comment down below what your favorite part of these chapters are, and if there's anything that you would have changed for the movie. Also, if this is your first time watching, check out the playlist on my channel to catch up on any episodes you might have missed so far. And if you enjoyed this format, take a look at Movies vs. Manuscripts Lord of the Rings Edition. Anyway, thanks again to my patrons, have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.